Hello, everyone. Welcome to our All Voices fireside chat. My name is Christina Giordano, she, her, and hers, and I'm the Senior Partnerships Manager at AllVoices and host our interview series, Reimagining Company Culture. This fireside chat is hosted by AllVoices and Perkins Coie. At AllVoices, we help companies really uncover workplace issues by giving employees a safe space to speak up. AllVoices is the first platform really built to give employees a psychologically safe space to speak up as well. I am really excited to introduce you to our guest today. If we could give a warm welcome to today's moderator, Emily Bushaw. She is Employment Litigation Partner at Perkins Coie LLP, and our guest, Mary Ward, Chief People Officer at Acxiom. So welcome, and thank you so much both for being here. Emily, I'll pass it to you.
Thanks, Christina. I'm excited today to have a fireside chat with Mary about AllVoices platform and sort of best practices, her company's experience with the platform, what features she uses most, and sort of cover the landscape of all things related to the platform. So before we get into it, I think it'd be helpful to kind of just set the stage of sort of what Acxiom is about. What does the company do? How many employees, so that we sort of have a context of maybe how you might be using AllVoices platform as we go forward today.
Yeah, absolutely. Well, first, let me start with thanking you for inviting me to be on the fireside chat. I'm honored to be here. It's a privilege to come and share how we have implemented AllVoices at Acxiom, and best practices feels like a lot to live up to. So I just hope that what I share is helpful. Might not be the best, but we certainly have enjoyed using the tool. We use it in a few different ways, so I'm excited to get to talk about that, and just really thank you again for asking me to be here. So Acxiom is a data company, and we also help our clients with all kinds of technology needs that they might have in the way in which they use their data. So thinking about the way that big companies might do their marketing for their customers. We are sort of behind the scenes helping them take their data and make actionable insights out of those so that they are putting their marketing dollars to best use. So we work with a lot of really great clients who want to use data in the most ethical way to just make sure that they're meeting their customers' needs for the kinds of things that they might want to be marketing to them for. So that's a little bit about Acxiom. We are about 2,800 employees worldwide. We're in 5 different countries, and we call our employees, sometimes I'll go back and forth between employees, and then we also use associates. We believe that our people are as invested in the company as as any leader or anybody that might be in a leadership position. So we are somewhat intentional about using that. So you'll hear me say that interchangeably, sometimes employees, sometimes probably associates more than employees. So yeah.
And are you, so 5 countries, geez Louise. I mean, I suppose you're similar in the new post-COVID age where you've got employees in all over the US. Do you have folks in a variety of different states as well?
We do. Yeah, we do business in 45 of the 50. Yeah, for sure. So before COVID, we were a pretty remote friendly company where we had people working, we even if you lived near an office, if you needed to work remotely, like we had the capability to do that. So even when COVID hit, while it was a shock to the system for some of us to work more remote than not, from a technology perspective, we never skipped a beat. Like we were able to just go home, open up our laptops, and they all worked like they were supposed to. So that was.
Well, then you were ahead of the curve, because I know as
we're lucky.
counseling companies, when COVID hit, just dealing with the logistics of, okay, everyone needs a computer, everyone needs a home setup, everyone needs remote access. So I'm sure that made the transition so much smoother.
It really did.
What So how is your company's HR function set up? Do you have like investigation teams and, different HR teams that are spread out, and how do they sort of work with employees given the breadth and scope of where your employees are located?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think that human resources is one of those functions at a company that is probably pretty standard. I mean, there are different flavors. Some people don't like to call it HR. They like to call it talent or people and culture or something like that. But when you start to get under the covers of that, right, you have a talent acquisition team, you have a talent development team, you have, that would be like learning and, things like that. And then, just a benefits team and an operations team and on and on and on. And so we're set up very similarly at Acxiom. We call those our centers of excellence. So that talent attraction team does our recruiting. We have the learning team. We have the benefits and operations team. We have a compensation team. And one of the key functions that we have carved off is what we call associate relations, but it's the employee relations function. And it is a collaboration of not only people who work on sort of employment cases as they come up, but also our legal, our employment law function also lives within that. So it is sort of an all-encompassing team where you would see the kinds of things like you talked about take place. So if there were complaints and we needed to do an investigation, it would happen within that team. With somebody who was struggling from a performance perspective, that would also get handled from that team, just slightly different people from the team who work on that.
So what HR groups are using AllVoices platform?
That team that I described, our associate relations team primarily, they are sort of the owners, what I think of as like the owners of the platform. So they were very involved in the implementation. When the cases, when somebody inputs something into AllVoices, they're kind of the first place that it goes to triage. Who should we send this on to for further information or for further discussion? And so they really sort of shepherd that process and tool for us. However, we see primary users being kind of across the board. Like people will use AllVoices at Acxiom to ask questions about a variety of things. So it wouldn't be unusual if someone had a compensation question. They might put it in AllVoices, and we make sure it gets routed to the compensation team to be able to answer it. Our business partner team does a lot of interaction with AllVoices. Our operations team, sometimes we'll get like benefits questions through there, even though we have a separate way for people to ask those kinds of questions. Sometimes they sneak in because people are like, oh yeah, AllVoices, we're supposed to be using that. So it's actually built up a really nice brand AllVoices has within our employees to be able to use it to just have an anonymous confidential conversation with HR.
Well, and I think that's so important to be able to have a platform where employees feel comfortable using it. The idea that you're getting questions, not just, employee concerns being raised, but questions about compensation or questions about benefits. It's really refreshing to hear that employees know they have a direct way to get answers, even if maybe there's multiple avenues.
100%.
The use of the platform to be able to field all kinds of questions and concerns, track them and route them, I think is so important because, as one small question that seems very small, maybe related to compensation, can turn into a big festering issue if it falls through the cracks, right? If it's in someone's email box and the ball gets dropped or it gets missed, at the time, it may not seem like it's going to be lead to liability or lead to risk or lead to like an employee relations issue, but those type of things can add up over time. And so it's interesting to hear you say that employees are using AllVoices for so many other ways other than, filing complaints of, discrimination or harassment as we typically think of these things.
Yeah.
That kind of leads me to the question of, so stepping back for a minute, why did you decide to implement AllVoices? Like, what was it that you thought this is the right fit for us?
Yeah. It was really that capability to have a truly anonymous conversation with somebody about anything that might be on their mind. Initially going in, it was more about people being able to express concerns to us, right? And that variety on the spectrum of concern, right? From like, maybe not like a huge, really serious concern, all the way up to like something that needed to be formally investigated. Like we have a process for that, and we always have, and people generally know what that is. We publish it. It's easy to find within our operations, but sometimes people, I think, are like, yeah, but still that person that I have to reach out to express my concern knows my name, right? And so this what was so interesting to us about AllVoices was that at least for that, initial contact, people could feel confident that they could take it as far as they wanted to have an anonymous conversation. And then if they felt comfortable enough to take it all the way to where, like, in order to resolve it, like, we're not going to be able to resolve it until we know more specifics. So you're going to have to give us more specifics. Like, just, it helps with that building of the trust, so that people can really raise things that, that they want to talk about that maybe they wouldn't have brought forward if not having had that path. So that's what really drew us, was that ability to have that conversation back and forth. And then, sometimes you get these questions that, people will ask, and either it's in a bigger forum or it's in a way where you don't have the ability to kind of go back and forth and be like, okay, I hear you saying this. Is this what you mean? Is this what you're asking? Give me more information, right? And it just really helps with like really being able to kind of get at the heart of a matter and have an honest conversation.
Yeah, I mean, you raise a good point. I mean, traditionally, right, we think of like complaint process of like, okay, you're supposed to go to your manager with your concern. And if you're not comfortable with your manager, you're supposed to go to some other manager. And if you don't want to do that, you're supposed to go to HR. But really, all of it is built around face-to-face interaction. I mean, certainly you could send an email, but the point is, they know who you are. And it's interesting, to your point, that allowing this anonymous, even chat function at the initial stage can help set employees at ease about raising their concerns, and then making that sort of an informed decision about whether they want to move forward to, identify themselves or process down a formal investigation route, depending on what the issue is and the circumstances are. It seems like, I mean, comparatively, after rolling out AllVoices, did you see an uptick in employees raising issues or asking questions?
Yes, we did. Yes, especially in that, I would say probably the first month. We saw a really big uptick. And so that was great. Like, we welcomed it. We wanted to hear from people. We wanted to learn. And then I'll be honest, like, because of the way we've deployed it, which maybe we'll talk about in a little bit more detail, but we use it for probably a bit more of a broader use case than just concerns and complaints. But typically when we have either some big communication that rolls out or there's a big change, we'll also see an uptick then of people like giving us feedback or asking questions that maybe they didn't feel comfortable just asking in either their leader or in a broader like town hall communication or something like that. They'll be more comfortable asking it in that setting, and then we can answer it, right? And we can go back and forth. Like, they can say, well, that didn't really answer my question. And we're like, okay, give me more of what you're looking for. And we can have that two-way dialogue anonymously. So,
I mean, you raise another interesting point that AllVoices platform can be used not just to raise concerns that might need some sort of investigation, but just general concerns or questions in the workplace. And you're touching on this idea that you use it for a variety of things. Like, what are some examples of the ways that you use the platform?
Yeah. So for basically any way that somebody might want to give us information or have a conversation, we've enabled it to be able to do that. So think of it definitely from the initial use case that you would think about for AllVoices, right? So for concerns and complaints, it's definitely an avenue for that. We also have a couple of other two that I'll talk about specifically, sort of categories that you can use when you go into the tool. So for those of you who have not used the tool, like there's a URL specific to your company. We send that out, and we talk about AllVoices a lot so that it sort of normalizes using that platform so that people become comfortable with, not only using it for a couple of the ways I'm fixing to describe, but also for the traditional use case, right? Like we just really wanted to normalize the usage of it so that we could get the most out of it. And so that's one of the best things that we've done is we talk about AllVoices a lot, and we send that URL out in lots of different channels and ways to communicate. And so one use case that we use additionally, I'll talk about two of them, but this is the first one. We have town halls on a quarterly basis. That's where we bring the whole company together and we share information about maybe what's happened over the past quarter or upcoming, just like news and events or whatever, right? Whatever you would traditionally think of as in a big corporate meeting. And we send out about 2 weeks in advance of the town hall, we send out a link to AllVoices, and people can go in and select a category to ask town hall questions. And so we collect all those anonymous questions, and then the executive leadership team prepares, gives some thought to those questions and answers them within the town hall. And so that's kind of one use case that we really, really enjoy. So at least we know on a quarterly basis, we're getting that URL out to people, reminding them that this platform exists, ask questions, but also this platform exists, right, in case you need it. And then the second thing that we use it for is there's a category for general feedback or areas of improvement. So lots of people have sent in ideas. We had this one communication that went out about a new R&D recognition, research and development recognition program. And we had several people who entered their ideas this recognition program, and somebody sent in the idea of, think about doing this X, Y, and Z in an additional communication. And we're like, oh, we hadn't thought to do that. Thanks to that person using AllVoices and getting us that kind of real-time feedback, we were able to go back, clarify some communication points, remind some people to do some things. And so we've had countless examples where people are just like, I have an idea. I have something that I think you should be doing better, and I want to tell you that. And so they do, and we take it, and when we can, try to implement it.
Right.
So that's been a couple of ways that we've used it that we didn't intend to use it that way, but it's just turned out to be really good. So
Yeah, the example of the town hall, it seems it's kind of ingenious, right? To be able to get the questions before the meeting, right? And so you as the company understand even before you are talking about these particular issues or these ideas, or you're rolling out some program, you understand what the concerns are and what the questions are of employees, and you can respond to them in a thoughtful way. Because I think sometimes, normally you roll something out, let's say it's a change in policy, and then you get the feedback of that change after the fact. And sometimes you're scrambling to answer these questions, and it leads to sort of unclear statements or inconsistent statements where you've got, maybe a manager answering one way and an HR professional answering another way. And so it seems a bit, ingenious to use AllVoices to get the questions in advance so that you can pre-plan and sort of address these questions and have a consistent response that's thoughtful, that's not reactive.
Right. Yeah. Sometimes there's definitely a benefit there, right? Because what you might imagine, and I'm going to answer, Sam's asked us a couple questions on the Q&A. I'm going to answer them in just a second. But you can imagine sometimes, because it's an anonymous way for people to ask questions, sometimes their tone isn't always, what you would like respond to in the best way, or the way that they ask the question, like if not for an anonymous nature, like sometimes people wouldn't ask the questions the way that they do. And so it does give you time to like take a step back and be like, okay, what's the nature of what they're asking, right? And like really think of a thoughtful response. And Sam asked, what if someone asks an appropriate question? Do you just not include it? Which is a really great question. We try to include, as long as they're relevant to like what's going on in the company at the time, if it's a business related question, or we get lots of questions these days about what are you doing about inflation and compensation and how are you going to better compensate us? Like we get lots. So as long as it's like related to our company and the business, like we try to answer them all. Now, if it's, if it's something that's either like we can discern that maybe it will be too obvious that they're asking about like a specific person or situation, it's like doesn't seem appropriate to broadcast that in a town hall. What's great again about using AllVoices is you can go back to that person because you don't know who it is, but you can respond back through AllVoices and say, it probably doesn't make sense for this to be a town hall question. I'll answer you directly, and like kind of handle it that way. And that way that we're meeting their need, right, while trying to respect the privacy of whatever the situation or the person or that sort of thing is. So it actually gives us more flexibility to handle some of that kind of less appropriate stuff that comes up. So I hope that helps, Sam. But that's what we do.
Well, yeah, I mean, that's a good point. You can try to answer some of the less appropriate questions on the side. I guess that raises the question for me of sometimes you don't want to put things in writing. I mean, depending on the circumstance. Yes. And that's coming from the lawyer here who is thinking about every lawsuit that I've ever defended companies in. And I think, ooh, it would have been better if we didn't have this written down, this particular statement or whatever, was said. How do you handle sort of sensitive situations where you think maybe a written response isn't the best method?
It's a really great question. If it comes up through town hall questions, we most certainly try to answer them in the meeting and then not publish, right? Like any of the written, like we definitely try to, and we're purposeful about that, right? Just making sure that we answer it in the moment. I think when you and I met for the first time, Emily, I talked about my love and adoration for my employment law team, and particularly the leader of that team. He and I work so closely together, and he works so closely with the rest of the HR function, just making sure that when we think about answering questions, providing information and documentation out, that we're thinking holistically about the situation, the person that we're responding to, and the company, and just trying to balance all those things. And we're lucky enough to have in-house counsel. I feel very blessed to have that opportunity to work with somebody, and he really help us frame up that response back when we need it. Like we don't always need it, but there are definitely times when we just want to take extra care and concern with making sure we approach things the right way. So.
And earlier you said there was an uptick in employee questions or comments once you deployed AllVoices. I guess my question is two parts. How did you manage that uptick, right? Because I think sometimes companies can be, if they want feedback, but can be a little bit fearful of like, oh my God, what do we do with all this feedback? And how did you sort of manage it, manage the uptick? And my second question is, does the anonymous chat have to be real time, or can you see it and go back in, an hour later and answer the question? And how do you set expectations for employees about when they're going to get a response?
Yeah, it's great. We learned really quickly up front, because we did see that. Now the uptick was like, within the first week we had maybe 11 cases. That's what the tool calls it, right? And so we talked about that, right? Like we should set some service level agreements, some SLAs, so that people know what to expect for a response, right? And so where we landed, and this helped us manage the uptick, we landed with, as soon as that, what I love about AllVoices, I'm like tied to my email at all times, right? Like my email's my to-do list. It's my, what's latest and greatest going on between that and Slack. Like that's the best ways to reach me. And AllVoices will send an immediate email when a case gets filed, right? When someone logs a case, and then send you the link to go look at it. And again, that associate relations team's the first to see that, because they're the only ones who can see all the cases when they come across. And then they will do an immediate response back, whoever kind of happens to be sort of working the box where that gets entered in, they will immediately respond back to say, we got this, thank you, we got this. I'm going to forward this on to whoever might be the right person to answer your question. You should expect to hear something within, we say 24 hours. Now, it might not be the final answer, but within 24 hours, you'll at least hear something back that we're looking at it, that we've answered it, that we've, need more information, you'll hear something back. And so that gave us a little bit of time to then, with that uptick, to then be able to kind of divvy out and say, okay, these couple questions, and I think this question got asked earlier in the Q&A, like how do you route things? So we spent a lot of time up front with the AllVoices team on the implementation, thinking about what kinds of things we might get asked, right? Compensation questions, or things related to organizational changes, or, things that, people might feel discriminated against or have a concern, right? And then we identified people who could see the cases based on those kinds of categories. And so that's how we route things, and that's how the permissions are set up. That's how that ticketing works. So if you weren't set up, like we'd have to go back through a whole review of, if our compensation team hadn't been set up, then we'd have to go through a whole thing of getting them accessed and the right people set up and that sort of thing. So the tool's very nice about being configurable around who can answer what kinds of questions and keeping the permissions locked down to that. So that's kind of how we handle that. I hope that I said a lot. I hope that was helpful.
Yeah, no, you answered the question, I think, in the comment. My follow-up is, so if you have a compensation question, what you're saying, I think I heard, is that your compensation team, let's say your payroll team, can have specific permission to see and answer compensation questions only?
Yes.
So they wouldn't be able to go in and see like a pending investigation for harassment or something right, not related to compensation.
That's right. That is correct.
Excellent.
Yeah.
So, and that kind of dovetails into this idea of complaint routing. It seems like the platform is, incredible at being able to track and route complaints. What, prior to the platform, how did you see complaints or questions coming in, and sort of what were some of the pitfalls that occurred before you implemented AllVoices platform with respect to like routing complaints?
Yeah.
Or questions?
We had to rely on email for the routing, which is kind of depending on how busy somebody is, or if they're out of the office, or, that sort of thing, then relying on email to do the routing was definitely something that held us back at times. Acxiom's a technology company, so we use and utilize a lot of different technology in our human capital. So we use Workday. We're a huge Workday proponent. And we have a case management system that helps us with kind of like the behind the scenes filing and things like that. And so like we still use that and use it up until. And so it was really, that helps us also from a case management perspective. So, it was really, though, because that wasn't kept in a repository in a place where we could do this kind of routing, that was really the biggest thing that was holding us back from being kind of best in class on that. So.
And I can imagine, if I'm in HR and I want to see, we have 11, let's say we have 11 questions that have come in the week, and I want to see, what the status is of those. It seems like in the pre AllVoices stage, you might have to email compensation and say like, hey, has anyone answered this? Or right, what's the status? Or is it closed? What is going on with this concern?
Yeah.
And so in AllVoices, how is that different than, doing it the email way?
Yeah, it's definitely nice to have it all in one place. And so for those of us who have sort of that admin view of AllVoices, like I can see that, our employment lawyer leader can see that, as well as our associate relations team. Now, not everybody, what you described earlier, not everybody can see that sort of full picture. But for those of us who really want to keep an eye on, are these things getting, asked and answered appropriately? It does give us the kind of one-stop place to go to do that. So, yeah.
And can individual folks who are handling any particular given question put in like notes that say the status of this issue, or that check a box that it's resolved?
Yes.
How do they, if there's a compensation question that was routed to payroll, how does the payroll person then, document what they did, what they said, and whether there's still action to be taken or it's closed?
Yeah. There's steps all throughout the tool to do those things. And there's actually a step at the very bottom that lets you categorize how you answered the question, right? Did you have to do a formal investigation? Did you just respond back? Did you whatever, right? You can categorize that, and then you click a little box that says it's been resolved, and it lets you, kind of closes that out and sort of archives it, if that makes sense, so that you can then go in and do reporting. We don't use it for a ton of reporting just yet, but I think we will. And I've done it. I've used it for when I need to parse between what are some of the just general feedback we've gotten, what's the town hall questions that we've gotten, and then what's the more formal concerns that we've gotten. So I look at it kind of in those three buckets, and it lets you, it's got a really nice export function to be able to, get that information out and report on it. So.
Yeah, I mean, let's jump into one of my other topics that I wanted to ask you about, which was data reporting. And so you have the ability to export out sort of the holistic, aggregate feedback on a particular topic. And have you done that? And what kind of ways do you use the data that you're collecting and aggregating from AllVoices?
What we've done so far in terms of exporting is really just exporting the initial either inquiry or question to just sort of do some thematics on how many of these kinds of questions are we getting, how many of this general feedback are we getting, and just do some thematic analysis, right? I have not done anything that exports out even the back and forth answer, ask another question, answer, ask, nothing like that. But it's really just sort of that. The reporting that we've done so far is just that aggregate. What kinds of cases are we getting, and are there any themes across those that we want to make sure we're highlighting to our leadership?
Yeah, I mean, themes is such a huge thing to look at. I mean, it seems so simple, but it's not done very often, right, in the company, because daily, there's so many things that you're doing on any given day, like investigating a concern or answering a question, but being able to look at the aggregate data and saying, wow, we have this theme. We have, employees are concerned about, sick leave rollover, or, why do we not have a paid holiday for this particular holiday? Right. It's always, at least from my, labor and employment attorney hat, it's always so good to hear companies looking at the data holistically and identifying themes and then taking action, because it then, prevents future lawsuits or legal claims, not because maybe a paid holiday is a legal risk, which it's typically not, but because, right, holistically, if your employees are feeling heard and their concerns are being addressed, and you have that dialogue and you're making changes based on, aggregate feedback, you're going to have a much happier, more invested employee base. And that's going to end up, reaping benefits in the long run So it's interesting to hear you say that you're looking at, those themes. The other piece of this, right, from investigation process is being able to look at, okay, how many complaints of, religious-based discrimination are we getting, or how many complaints of age-related, retaliation are we getting? Have you been in a position to date to look at the types of complaints of harassment or discrimination or retaliation, and sort of look at what protected classes might be being raised? And if so, has it been helpful for you to plan your path forward?
Absolutely. Yeah, I would say yes and yes. We have, and we try to be really thoughtful about doing that on a set frequency, right? So that we just are in this rhythm of being data driven with our people metrics, and using the AllVoices for that. Also, all the other people metrics that we look at, and thinking about that all together, right? Like, what is our attrition looking like? And, from a voluntary and involuntary perspective, and, what's AllVoices telling us about some of that, and trying to bring all that together. So yeah, it's really nice to have that repository and a way to kind of look at again, when you go into AllVoices and you want to, sort of log your case, right? When, if you're the person inputting it, just having that categorization, that's really important. You just need to stop before you implement and think about the kinds of things that because your employee base, the kinds of things that are top of mind, and just really thinking about having that end in mind for how you want to use the data on the back end is super important to enable that. So I think that's a really big part of it, is thinking about that as you're implementing it, so that you can enable sort of that back end analysis.
And so do you have the ability to customize sort of how you're going to categorize concerns? And can you, for example, like, could you categorize by the typical protected classes, race, age, sexual orientation, religion, but could you also add categories like compensation, I don't know, diversity, other sort of ways to categorize?
Yeah. And, there's many great things about AllVoices, but the out of the box implementation that they offer has a lot of that already thought through. So they think about some of those categories, but they were also very flexible with us when we wanted to make just a few adjustments, right? Like, well, we really kind of like to word it like this, or we'd like to see this additional category. And they were very responsive in how we could, think about that creatively, or, or if we needed to make a change, like we wanted to make a change to add this ability to capture like areas of improvement ideas. Like, that was kind of an afterthought after we started seeing some of the ways that people were engaging. And, we just worked through with our account manager, and she helped us get that in queue, and then we got the change implemented. And so, yeah, it was really great.
Yeah, it's excellent to be able to use it and then modify it as you see how your employee base is using it, right? Because that's going to drive the changes that you need to make, and having the flexibility to modify it is critical, because the things, not only do we not necessarily know all the issues that are on top of employees' minds, but those issues change over time. 3 years ago, right? I mean, think pre-COVID, the things that employees were concerned about are completely different than they are today. And so, like, being able to continually look at this and make changes that are necessary for your business, instead of being sort of stuck in this rigid formality, which is what historically we've done when it comes to raising employee concerns. It's either, like I said before, talk to your manager or a human of some sort, or call a hotline and talk to a third-party provider, which, I think this is the next generation of really getting holistic, like, employee engagement. One of the other things I was thinking of about aggregating data is not only themes, but sometimes as I counsel companies on labor and employment issues, I will have a situation, typically it's at litigation, unfortunately, and we learn that the employee has complained, that multiple employees have complained about the same person over time, and the company didn't know. And typically, if it's accident, right? It's because the different employees complain to different HR business partners, and those partners are no longer at the company, or they saved their documentation on a local computer and there's no central repository. And so you end up with a situation where maybe a bad actor has flown under the radar for a period of time and the company wasn't aware. So talk to me about how, if that's something that you have noticed AllVoices can address, and if you're looking at that aspect of who's getting complained about, or the flip side, is there a complaining party who's complained many times over the same issue, which may be legitimate and may not be legitimate, but it's still a data point that's worth looking at. Have you used AllVoices in that way, and what are your thoughts about it?
Definitely high level themes around, and I say high level intentionally, right? Like things around, maybe it's one business area, right? Or we've had very few that have come through that have been very specific, right, about a person or persons or things like that. But there definitely have been times with the tool where we've been like, okay, so maybe this thing we communicated, like maybe we could have done a better job there because this is causing confusion, or maybe this one area, like we might need to dig into that a little bit more because we've had a couple of things come through AllVoices. So yes, it's definitely given us the ability to sort of step back at the bigger picture, to see some of that stuff. Now I think that we need a little more time with it to like see how that continues to evolve, because I think we'll just see that more and more as we use the tool. But right now people I think they're still getting a little bit used to then and trusting of the anonymous factor, right? And so there've not been a lot of like so and so, this name, that name, and like true concerns about people. It's been higher level, if that makes sense. So
yeah, I mean, I see your point. Like sometimes you're not going to get this clear sort of what I call like a smoking gun of like, oh, we've got a bad actor. 5 people have complained about this bad actor, but it seems like it's certainly more nuanced. And even if I've had situations where we've had departments where the way the department is managed or the culture of the department is not in sync with the rest of the business. And so it seems like this tool could help identify that as well. If it's not a particular, it's not isolated to a particular person, it might be, this particular department is running things in a way that's not consistent with, our policies, or has a culture that is out of line with the rest of the business. One thing I just thought about is like this like union activity, right? I mean, which I hate to even say the word because it's like traumatic for private companies to think about unionized workforces. But, as a labor and employment lawyer, there's been a trend recently where many private companies, tech companies, retail companies are getting unionized workforces. And it's been pretty shocking because normally we think about, manufacturing companies or, more blue collar type of workers who are unionized. But recently it's really been this sort of surprise, I think, in the tech and retail industry where employees are unionizing. And I could see AllVoices platform as being a good pulse on the employees, right? Because as we try to get ahead of a union campaign by hearing the employees' concerns, addressing those, so that if a union tries to come in and, persuade them that the employee base needs a union to, assert their rights, the employees have already been heard, and they know that they don't need a representation to be heard.
Yeah.
And so in this day and age, I think another benefit of AllVoices is sort of getting a pulse on the employees from union perspective, right? Because a lot of times we'll see one department having grumblings about a union, and being able to hear sort of the discord in particular departments could really go a long way, I think, to try to do things in advance of a union campaign to try to make sure employees feel like they don't need a rep, they can be heard directly.
Yeah, I could definitely see that. I definitely don't have it as much experience with that, and we don't have unions in the type of workforce that we have. But I could see that for sure. I think that's a really
yeah. It's a very surprising sort of turn over the last just couple years that companies that we never expected to be unionized are going union, and it's been a shock to leadership.
for sure.
And so, at Perkins, we always advise our clients, like, if we provide certain services on, how to sort of get the pulse of your employees prior to a campaign, but this platform is also a way to do it. Because it's the trend at this point. There was always wage and hour class actions, for which there still are, but that was, very big pre-COVID. And now I think we're in unions for private companies at tech and retail and, accommodations, which we're not going to go there. We're talking about AllVoices, but that's sort of the trend. And I think AllVoices could really do a lot to sort of help, address any union sentiments that might be under the surface that the company isn't necessarily even aware of. Okay, so off my tangent on unions, let's talk about the investigation process of actual complaints that are, that warrant an investigation. So tell me, how does your investigations team use AllVoices to investigate concerns that rise to the level of needing an investigation?
Yeah. They would interact first and foremost with the case as it comes through, right? Like that associate relations team would do that initial triage, decide if it needs to, who it needs to go to after the fact. Most of our investigations are handled either through the leader of that associate relations team or through one of our two employment lawyers. And so they just decide, kind of what's the best approach there based on the situation. And then they would begin to sort of converse back and forth with that person through AllVoices, right? Asking questions, getting more information, allowing that person to share what they're comfortable sharing. And then at some point, sometimes it can just be resolved by, okay, maybe this is an issue going on within a department, so we can have some broad department discussions, right? And you don't have to get into any specifics that involve people or anything like that. Like you can, and so sometimes that can happen, and that would be a recommendation back. But then sometimes it might, get to the point where it's like, here's either the person within HR or legal corresponding back to the person who filed the case. Like we can only go so far without knowing who you are, who you're talking about, more about the situation. We may need to meet in person, we may need to have a Zoom call or whatever, right? And so we would just go down that path, and then for as much as that person's comfortable, and we've had plenty where they've said, okay, yeah, let's talk further, like you can call me here, you can contact me there, that sort of thing. And so then it would just follow like a typical investigation from that point on. But as far as interaction with AllVoices, like we really utilize it back and forth with having that correspondence until the point in which we either resolve it or we need them to, come forward with more information in an anonymous matter.
So let's say they come forward with more information and you're doing a full blown, you're interviewing witnesses. You may or may not be drafting a report, but you're, taking notes of sort of what you're finding factually.
Yeah.
How do you use AllVoices to document that process? Do you upload? Do you have your own company forms that you upload? Are there notes fields in the platform? How do you track and document the investigation process and sort of witness statements and things like that?
Yeah, it's a great question. I mentioned some of our technology that we still have in place. We still have a legal files, kind of a database that we maintain. All of that would be put in there. We would just have references back and forth between the two tools so that we would know, when cases are related and that sort of thing. I think as we continue to use AllVoices more, we will figure out what we can, sort of move from one platform to the other to have it really truly all in one place. We're still sort of in the infancy stage with some of that. And I don't think we've progressed quite far enough to use that capability yet within AllVoices. But definitely not ruling it out. We just haven't gotten them yet.
I see. So in AllVoices, you would make a note, witness interviews are found in X repository. Yeah. I see. Okay. One of the questions I had was about designating an investigation as attorney-client privileged. Have you used that function in AllVoices?
I probably, I'm not sure I know the answer to that. Perhaps I should follow up with some of my folks who actually interact with the tool that way. I certainly wouldn't, because I was doing like the actual investigation. I would be more on a readout or something like that. So I wish I knew, but I don't, Emily.
It's okay. That's okay. That was off the cuff. So
yeah,
forgive me.
No, it's all good. It's all good.
And so I guess one of my questions about using AllVoices to track, concerns and questions is, have you noticed that, like an improved efficiency or an increased speed in getting things resolved?
Yes, for sure. Yeah. For sure. It just, again, kind of having it there and all in one place, and the team being able to, we sort of have that sense of importance, sense of urgency with it in the tool, knowing that people have asked, they're waiting for a response, or they're waiting for further information. We really have put rigor around making sure that we process those through to completion in a really timely manner. So yeah, it's been really helpful. I think really helpful versus it, again, going into email land where it might be waiting for somebody and, oh, I forgot to ask so-and-so where this stands, right? Versus there it is on our report that we can see every week that hadn't been answered or whatever, right? So
do you have the ability with AllVoices to sort of audit the decisions that are being made or the information that's being provided for consistency, right? Like I could imagine, we give a coach and counsel for this type of behavior. We've terminated the employee for this type of behavior. Is there a way to look at sort of the outcomes and see, are we consistent? Are there, basically looking at sort of the behavior and the result and issue spotting red flags?
Yeah. I think the biggest thing that helps us with that is we have a consistent team that manages all of that. And so I think that, and they've worked together for a good amount of time. They've, worked with our leaders for a good amount of time. And it's, kind of known what the processes and steps are and different things. And so I think that probably helps more than anything. Not to say that the tool couldn't or wouldn't. We've just not had quite the need for it to do that for us, because we've had a pretty static set of folks who help manage that for us. That's really what's helping us there.
Yeah, I mean, that's certainly really important to have. If you've got a small group of folks who are making these types of decisions, you're going to get more consistent decisions.
Yeah.
And that sort of leads me to one thought I had, which is, you know, I always cringe when I hear, like a manager, made decision X to take X discipline or adverse action, right? Instead of consulting with HR, routing the concern through HR, but sort of handling things on their own. Has AllVoices have you seen, improvement in managers' ability to sort of route things to HR to be answered because they know this tool exists, and so they don't necessarily feel compelled to like address these things on their own, that they're sending employees to AllVoices more frequently than they did in the past?
Interesting. It's a good question. And I don't think we've had it deployed long enough to know yet if that, I do think that leaders have always known, because we've had a very really open sort of communication about when you have concerns about someone's performance, or like this is how that process works. Like you don't do a performance plan by yourself. You don't do like all those things, right? Like,
Right.
with that. And so that has always been super helpful. I think probably though, what we see more is more interaction with our employees to feel comfortable raising concerns kind of the other way, right? And I do think leaders are reinforcing that, and they probably will do more and more of it, but it's probably more coming from employee to us versus leader to employee to if that makes sense.
Yeah. So we have one question in the chat. It says, for the anonymous questions submitted for town hall, do you create a pulse survey to get those? Is that the best place?
We used to, that's what we used, like SurveyMonkey and that sort of thing, to do an anonymous survey before. That's how people could send us their questions. And it worked well. The only thing is that sometimes if we got those inappropriate questions, or if we didn't always get to respond, or we had further questions about what did you mean, like you didn't have any way to ask for more information, right? Like you had to be like, okay, I think this is what they mean by this question, so I'm going to answer what I think they mean by this question, and so that is how we did it before. Before we had AllVoices. Now we send them the URL for our AllVoices platform and tell them, when you go into the platform, select town hall questions and then just enter your question and submit it. And it's really super easy, super simple, and that's how we've deployed it. So Sam, that may not answer your question. If not, use the Q&A like AllVoices, give you more information.
Okay, well, I think we are at the end of our time. It looks like we have 2 minutes. So we blew through this. I could talk for another hour about AllVoices and your use of it.
I'm a big fan. I think it's been a really great tool for us. We've utilized it in some, traditional and non-traditional ways, and it's worked really well. So
great. Well, if anyone is watching and has any questions for us, feel free to reach out to us. I'm sure you can find us on LinkedIn, or maybe there's information on this invite. But happy to chat through any questions you might have. And otherwise, we'll turn it back over to Christina, who I think will close us out.
Thank you, Emily. Thank you, Mary. It was such a pleasure to have you and hear all of your use cases for AllVoices. Like Emily and Mary shared, if you have any follow-up questions, feel free to email us at marketing@allvoices.co or connect with any of us on LinkedIn. Have a great rest of your day, everybody.
Thanks, everybody. Thanks for having us.
Bye.